Hello, my name is Milani Douglas. And welcome to this fresh talk of art in the Ecstatic. I am the Director of Public Programs at the National Museum of Women in the Art. And on behalf of our directors, Susan F. Sterling, and our board, and all of our generous donors, we thank you for joining us for this evening, for this conversation that I am so excited about. I want to just open up and tell you about what the Fresh Talk is and who some of our generous supporters are. I'd like to give a special thank you to Denise Littlefield-Sobel, the Dari Davis Family Fund, the Rivada Foundation and the Logan family, and Susan and Jim Swartz Public Program, who makes this Women, Art, and Social Change public program initiative possible. The Fresh Talk is out of the Women, Arts, and Social Change, a public programs initiative that is curated conversations. It's one of the museum's signature programs that are based on providing platforms for women to advance creative ideas and solutions. And we really look at women who are working at the intersection of art and social change. We're looking at people who are champions of women and creating work that is forming and really advancing social change as well. If you are online and you're talking about the conversation, please put hashtag Fresh Talk for Change so that we can find how you are engaging the conversation as well. And once again, we thank you for joining us. At this time, we are going to have our presenters be able to come and speak about their work. We will start with Asha Elana Casey. Each presenter will give you some background to what they're talking about, what their work is digging into, and then we'll be able to have a conversation. Thank you.
Hi, Milani. Thank you so much for this. I'd like to start with the first slide, which is, well, the slide after this is, which I'm talking about symbology and prose of the spirit. And so I started with a baby picture of myself because initially my work was very abstract. It was very centered on just energies, but I found that I needed to represent myself and I needed to find God within myself, which to the next slide, I began to find that through Christian themes. So around this time, I was thinking about the mandorla, which is, so if we go to the next slide, I was thinking about the mandorla, and I was thinking about just Byzantine art in general and halos. And so my work is grounded in prose and literature. So the quote, "I found God in myself and I loved her fiercely" by Ntozake Shange was really a grounding theme in the work. So next slide, please. So what I decided to do for this PowerPoint was to kind of break down what you're going to be seeing with each artwork and really how the divine shows up. And so I touched on at first the Byzantine Christianity references with the mandorla, which is the field of energy, the aura that surrounds Jesus, and the halo as a way to venerate and recognize my subjects. And this is one of my old friends, Ashley. And then the lapis lazuli, ultramarine blue, which was a color I was really attracted to, but I found that it also was symbolic of richness. And the cowrie shells, when I was starting to look into African spiritual systems, that is a tool for divination. And that was something that continued in my work for a year or so after making this. Next slide, please. And so when we look at this work was me experimenting with different materials. And so this is a gris-gris. And so it's inspired by another piece of literature, a poem actually, "My Soul Has Grown Deep Like the River." So next slide. And so it was inspired by Negro Speaks of Rivers. And at this time, I was working at this place called Nation House. It was a private African-centered school. And I actually did a lesson on gris-gris. There was this little book that taught lessons inspired by like African cultures. And it was an African-centered school and they just had it. So one of the lessons was to create gree-grees and medicine bags. So I did that. And this was a poem that the students learned. So next slide, please. And so at this point, I was thinking about a few things. So we still have the cowrie shells, but now we have like the medicine bag and the mojo bag as a symbol. And then we have this idea of ancestral veneration. And so with this piece, what I did this piece after my grandma died, and there was this, she had frames that had like these pictures of like flora in them. And so I took this as an opportunity to create like this box with like this gree-gree inside that was like, that had a poem and like an object of hers in it as well. So next slide. Around this time, I was looking into the Ifa tradition, and I was understanding my place within that tradition and what that looked like. So I was doing extensive research on the deities in that tradition. And one of the deities that reoccurred in my work was Elegua Eshu. And so this was like the first piece, which is he is the guardian of the crossroads. And in his origin story, there was one of the origin stories that I learned about, there was a significant expression of nature in it and how he became who he was. And I thought that was a really interesting introduction to nature in my work. So next slide. And so while I'm like looking into this tradition, one of the books I was reading at the time was The Altar of My Soul by Marta Moreno Vega. And one of the quotes that resonated with me in that book was, "I am Congo from Africa. Good evening, Creoles. I left my bones there." And I think about that particularly because Congo was a port city for enslaved Africans going to the Americas and the US in particular. As we think about like Virginia and Maryland, that was where they were coming from. Next slide. And so I was also looking at another piece, and this piece is going to ground a lot of my works as we're moving forward. But I was looking at Aaron Douglas's Into Bondage, and this is a piece I consistently always turn to, simply because of the expression of nature. So you're going to see some of these like leaf patterns repeating in my practice as well as we think about nature as a spiritual place. Next slide. And so this is just a continuation of that conversation of me understanding the deities in the Ifa tradition. This is Ocean's Grove. Next slide. And this is one of my pieces that isn't more informed. So as I was understanding myself within the tradition, I became aware of my Ori, which is my guardian, like head Orisha, and like the Orisha from my destiny, and the colors associated with that one. And it was a lot of white, like white was the color. And I thought like I could make all white paintings, but it might be cool to take that energy and think about, well, what metallic colors give that coolness? And I found a lot of silver making itself prevalent in my work. So next slide. And so as we're looking at this work, one thing that stands out to me is the rhinestones. And so I was reading a folk story by Zora Neale Hurston, Mules and Men. And I thought it was so fascinating. And it's the same story I'll reference later in this slide. But I thought it was so fascinating that spirits were described as looking like diamonds. And so the exact quote is, "All of them seen the light of diamonds when the wind shook the cover and the wind that passed over it sung songs." And that imagery like stuck in my head as I was creating. And I was like, oh, I need shiny stuff in my work. I need rhinestones. And this was the first piece I made that utilized that symbolism. So next slide. And so in this work, you're seeing this head Orisha I was talking about, my Ori, And you're also seeing the influences from Southern spiritual practices within her cloth with the clothes that she's wearing. And so you're seeing the face jugs, which you can find in the Carolinas to ward off evil spirits. You're seeing the Bakongo cosmogram, which is found at the base of vessels in Virginia and other southern places, used as like a ritual vessel. And you're seeing like the patterns found in quilts created by enslaved Africans within her cloth, right? So I was really thinking about, how do I like use like clothing to look back at her past. So next slide. And so we're looking at the same figures, but then we're looking at Elegua, which we saw earlier, who is like, you know, I got better, so he looks better now. And maybe all of them do, right? So I was really thinking about, how do these figures evolve with my understanding? And so you see like still this gray, shiny, silver coolness that is very indicative of my own spiritual practice. But then you also see an elevation and a change. So next slide. And so all the same things are happening. So I wanted to show you the pictures so that you could see them. But then you're also seeing something different, which is the depiction of the highest self. And I was thinking about your hair as like a symbol for your highest self and your heterisha. And so the figures that I create kind of in between this piece and the last piece and beyond it have rhinestones in their hair, because we're thinking about like, if rhinestones are stand-in for spirits and spiritual energy, then like your highest self is at like, I don't want to say the root, but the top of your head. So I was really interested to bring that symbolism to the heads of people I depict after this. So next slide. So you're gonna find that in this piece, like when I start painting other people's God selves. So this is a piece of my friend Chris, and I'm thinking about his God self, and I'm navigating, putting in symbols and things that represent him. Next slide. You see the same with my friend Lionel. I'm still using those symbols, but I'm utilizing like their own energy to depict their backgrounds and what's built and what makes up their inner cloth, like in their vessels. Next slide. And same thing that happens here with Muse. What I found most interesting about Muse's piece is that Muse is, was at the time when we had a discussion, an Ifa devotee, which means that they had a deity that they were keen on or interested in. And so you can see Shango in like the right shoulder. So next slide. And this is one of my most recent pieces, Mahari. And so I was also thinking about that same energy, and what was really exciting about depicting Mahari's like highest self was that she creates a lot, she has a lot of animals and greenery in her practice anyway. So I got to depict a snake in this work, which you can see at the very top of the piece. And I was really excited about that. So next slide. And so we come to my abstractions, and I think of my abstractions as references to my ancestors as well. And so the title of this piece is from the same story that I mentioned by Mules and Men. Folks ain't ready for souls yet, they clay ain't dry. That's not the whole title, but that's the beginning of that quote. And so we're again using rhinestones as a stand-in for the souls based on the story. And so the rhinestones are at the center of the natural landscape. And then you're seeing like these leaves that occur from the Aaron Douglas piece Into Bondage that we were talking about. So my work is also acting as an homage to like our ancestors, which is, I thought was pretty interesting. So the whole quote is, folks ain't ready for souls yet, they clay ain't dry. It's the strongest thing I ever made. Don't aim to waste none through loose cracks. And then men got to go strong enough to stand it. And I just really like that quote. So I decided to make it the title of this work. So next slide. So I touched on this as we were speaking, but here's a reference for you. So next slide. So as we're looking into these pieces, these are my mojo figures, which are going to inspire like the last piece you'll see. And so the mojo figures was my investigation of ancestry and my personal ancestry with like the South and their spiritual practices, but also like understanding like the hoodoo tradition and what does it mean to use herbs and plants to heal and to like conjure and to create. So with mojo figure number 1, this is a power figure. So we have taken the gree-grees and the medicine bags because they're mojo bags, right? So it's the same thing. We personified them and made them into figures. So that's what's happening with like the mojo figure series. So next slide. And so I was reading this one book called 365 Days of Hoodoo. And I was just kind of thinking about the different things that people have done in the tradition and like combining herbs and looking at herbal medicine to kind of create these figures. And yeah, so those are the materials. Next slide. And this is for your reference. So we get to this piece called Chatham Boy on Horse. I was taking the information that I've gathered from my research, and I was thinking about like my dad's lineage. He told me he rode horses when he was younger. And so the horse and the figure, they're all created from plants found in Virginia. So I thought it'd be a really interesting homage to that history. And also a conversation between like plants, ancestry, and place. So next slide. And so as I was working on these works, I was thinking a lot about, well, what do these figures do? What does it mean to combine all of the figures that I've created thus far? And so this quote says, "I'm speaking then, not with regards to the past, but the future. When I say that it is of consequence for the American Negro to retain the recollection of his African origin and of his American servitude. For the sake of the honor of his race, he should have a clear picture of the mental condition out of which he has emerged. This picture is not now complete, nor will be made so without record of song, tales, beliefs, which belong to the stage of culture through which he had passed," by William Wells Newell. And in this book, I thought it was really interesting, the threads that connected, I guess, spirituality from Nigeria to like the diaspora and what retained as people navigated the hoodoo tradition in the South. And also the stories that retained, like the Nazi, the spider, and even the stories that emerged from enslavement in regards to like Africans flying back to Africa, well, enslaved Africans flying back to Africa, and the Black bird, and Black people turning into mermaids. And so these are some conversations that I became really interested in highlighting and showing in my practice alongside of the magical practices in these spiritual traditions that occur today. Next slide. Yeah, so for your reference, this just like reiterates what I was talking about before in regards to like the flight and the Black ancestral practices. And I'm really excited in general to bring this into my new work moving forward. Okay. And so here's the images. The ancestor veneration happens because we're talking about like land that I've come from, that my family has come from. And then we're talking about like the mojo bags, and we're kind of reiterating that energy. but we're personifying it and making it into a figure. So next one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oletha, are you ready?
I'm ready. And I loved what you were presenting, by the way, Elana. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
I also want to thank the National Museum of Women in the Arts for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And also to thank those who are participating as the audience. I think this is an incredible opportunity to talk about this particular subject and how it has influenced the work that we do. And I found it interesting that the title, Art and the Ecstatic, to me, it's a transformative word that defies the time in which we live, really. I recently talked on a panel at UMBC on resilience and how, as African Americans, our community has longed for this kind of familiar, we're familiar with this word, resilience. And throughout history has sought the opportunities to stay connected to our families and communities by participating in issues around justice and spirituality. I think that life experiences in these times, we have to reinterpret survival and resistance. And the dominant narrative that exists in our society is really holding us back in many ways. I pulled up an article recently on modernity written by Marshall Berman, and I thought it was really interesting to read a quote if I can. And it says, "To be modern is to live a life of paradox and contradiction. It is to be overpowered by the immense bureaucracy that have the power to control and often to destroy all communities, values, lives, and yet undeterred in our determination to face these forces, to fight to change the world and make it our own. It is to be both revolutionary and conservative, alive to new possibilities, for experience and adventure, frightened by the nihilistic depths to which so much of modern adventure leads, longing to create and to hold on to something real, even as everything melts." I mean, I came across this and I thought about, the kind of work that we've been trying to do as artists and how we try to really convey a sense of reality that exists either within us or outside of us. And so when I think about the kind of work that we do, our capacity is always about promoting and supporting each other. And I have what I call a great group of women who are incredibly supportive. And that connection has kept me focused on the kind of work that I've done, whether I was an administrator or working in the arts or exhibiting my work. The most recent thing that has happened is Dr. Lowry Sims curated an exhibition at UMBC. And it actually gave me an opportunity to think about the work as a retrospective, because she did a retrospective. And all I can tell you is that when I consider the kind of work that I've done over the years, I know there's a thread. That thread became really apparent when all the work was together. And I've been in many exhibitions, but this one really helped me to see the trajectory of what I thought where my ideas were coming from. I really do believe that, when we look at our lives on this planet, and you guys all know this, we are humans who, in terms of Homo sapiens, the modern human, we've only been here for about 300,000 years. And looking through one of the articles that I was reading recently in the Forbes magazine, actually, that was published in 2019, just before the pandemic. The researchers had sequenced the genome of a chimpanzee. And that DNA is about 99% of our own DNA. That really fascinated me because I thought, here we are talking about where we are spiritually and how it is that we are to get back to a place that we understand. And what they said about the chimpanzees was they are a community of animals that take care of each other. They nurture each other, they care for each other. And I'm not saying there isn't any conflict in that, but I think the interesting thing to me was, how is it that we as humans, we are on an evolutionary scale that takes us forward, and yet what separates us from that chimpanzee? What separates us? I think that as we go through looking at our past, as we go through looking at the beginning of our lives, the beginning of human life, and that creature that stands upright, it turns out that we're like 0.002% part of the universe, our existence in this universe. And so that to me is incredibly vast, incredibly vast. So I think that as we move forward, our role, and I believe our role literally is to take care of each other. And how we do that can be in so many different ways. I think that America to me has always been this incredible experiment on the level of trying to bring together a varied group of people from all over the world. So I do want to go ahead and start with a slide. And the slide that I chose was from a prayer. And that prayer is called the Garden of the Heart. I'm sorry, this is the piece. The piece is called Garden of the Heart, but it's from a prayer. And it says, in the garden of thy heart, plant not but the rose of love. And I had never worked with this much yellow before. So for me, it was really quite interesting to riff off of this particular color, because it has such vibrancy of its own. And so everything on here is part of the found objects that I use. Sometimes I have received them from someone, but in the center of this piece is the heart. And that statement was also part of my wedding vows. So I ended up making this piece in 2022. And I think that it's referencing all those things that we are really attempting in some ways to understand about ourselves. And I say to understand about myself. So there's a lot of sequins and a lot of colors. And I'm really drawn to the colors that are in the blues, the ranges of blues. So yellow for me was a real experiment for me. Next slide. Anyway, when she comes to the next slide, we're dealing with two pieces. One is called Urzali on the left. I got to figure out my this is left or right. So on my left, and Dambala on the right. And Urzali is actually a reference to a Haitian spirit, the spirit of love. And she apparently is, ensuring that one is, what can I say? One is either in love through her I don't know, her uh, sort of fearsomeness. But she's also one of the goddesses that's married to, she'd been married 3 times. And I was always fascinated by Ursula because I've used her name in many of my pieces. And they are really built with this notion of how do I go about giving the vibrancy to these pieces that, you know, these gods and goddesses that they either deserve in the context of art making. I started out in painting, doing a lot of what I call abstract work, because I felt, again, that the work in terms of abstraction was really about trying to establish a subliminal connection to an audience. But at this stage, as I move through my work, and you can see it in the exhibition that I did, as you move through that work, what you see is that transition from the flat work into a more dimensional approach to the creative process for me. In Damballa, he's the one who, in the pantheon of deities, and certainly the African-based religion of voodoo, he takes the form of a snake. And he is the god of, or an agent of fertility. And he is, in that tradition, sort of a reptile creature. And he's about creativity and that regenerative spirit that we all seek. And because he sheds his skin, you know, he changes. He's an incredibly creative god. And unlike the Christian view of the snake, he represents something so totally different. And in many cultures, the snake is not this fearsome creature. It's more about, it enlivens the environment. He enlivens, or she, or it enlivens the environment to the degree that it is sacred. And so it is not the tempter, but someone who embraces. Next slide. In the lote tree, what I try to think about is how is it that we perceive our transitions? How is it that we see ourselves moving through our lives? And in this particular instance, the lote tree exists within Islam, many religions really, but Islam specifically. And it marks the utmost boundary that one can come to before one reaches the stool or the space in which we imagine God being. And what I say is that nobody knows what God is. Nobody knows that. And it always intrigued me when I was growing up that it was important to understand how people worship all over the world, because, you know, we get this sort of myopic idea that people only worship one way. And it really, really intrigued me to think about how that particular aspect of our inner self gets fed. So the lote tree for me was one concept that was really about the 7 heavens and the 7 earths, and this journey that we're all on, whether we believe in God or not. It's a journey that we're all taking at some level to find at the end of our life some aspect of how to transition. And so the lote tree is that place in which one finds yourself facing the throne of God. You can't step across or past it. The next one. The spirit sculptures, which people seem to know me better for, but the spirit sculptures were inspired by someone who had offered me a Haitian spirit bottle. And I had gone to Haiti, I guess in 2015, really to work with a group of people in Camp Coq, which is in the northern part of Haiti. And then I ended up in Jacmel, which is in the southern part of Haiti. And all I can think of is all the experiences that I had at that time were just rich and warm and wonderful. And people just were so receptive. And so I got to attend a ceremony. And I also got to work with other artists. And for me, the spirit sculpture is one that exists on individual levels with their individual voices, with individual ideas about what it is that constitutes spirit. I always find it interesting that our intuitive selves, we don't pay that much attention to in terms of modern life. And so I always think of it as, maybe the most important part of how I approach my projects and my work, that the spirit sculpture itself becomes a way of using what I have, finding what I have, using what friends give me, because they are based on rum bottles, or if I look at it, wine bottles, and I don't drink. So I always find it fairly interesting that these are the bottles that are used for libation. And yet I see them as, in this particular instance, as sculptures which serve on an altar space. So I feel like when I think about, again, going back to Urzali, this is an Urzali Dandor, or a Dantor, which is one that gives spiritual knowledge. And usually a lot of the Black Madonnas and those that are have that image of the Madonna on it are about having us navigate a material world. And so the spiritual knowledge that the sculpture offers is what's important. Next slide. Celebration of life. This is what spring is about to me. It had no other purpose other than to be joyous, looking at the four corners of the earth, thinking about how it is that there's such abundance at that time of year. And so this particular piece is fairly simple from that point of view. Everything I generate, I usually include something that is handmade that I've done. Some of the flowers, again, I pick them up, or it comes from fabric that I have. So all these things for me are, how do I put these together? That's where, to me, the intuition comes in. Next slide. Saint for My City actually is, again, a series of found objects that I worked with. And it was a guardian. It was a monument meant to be a guardian for the city of Baltimore. Because at the time, there were so many things happening that were just about the gun violence, about how it is that we treat one another. And so the obelisk is a series of all the names of God, all the names that we call God. That's essentially what that's about. And so I decided to do it in a graffiti style because I felt, again, it was a matter of interpretation. But it's interesting to me also that Baltimore, or Maryland, I should say, was the first Catholic state. And I'm not a Catholic, but I think that as we look at that history and try to understand that we have this incredible richness within our community, and how do we go back to that? How do we understand that? Next one. Song of Orpheus is really about, as is embellished, with the bead coming out of its mouth, the song happening over its head. It's one of the Greek gods, or the son of one of the Greek gods. I forget which one. Don't ask me that yet. But that's essentially what this particular piece is about. It's about music. It's about how do we get to that state in ourselves that we can express music. Next slide. This one came recently, it's 2022, Transcendent. And when I think about my visual arts, the work that I do, it stands between history and mythology and memory, and especially as it relates to the African heritage. I really believe that the framework of the material of found objects sometimes is far more expressive in terms of how it can be integrated. And I think you heard from Elana the very interesting things about cowrie shells. Cowrie shells represent the sea, they represent money, they represent all these things that are part of our physical life. And yet, we have to understand the origin of them. I actually, use clay in my pieces because I create these clay heads. And sometimes the heads sit around for like years. And then I see them as an opportunity to put them together with something that I'm considering in terms of creating. Next slide. Gemini, again, looking at the two clay heads, and actually my cousin's dreads, they are, to me, when I think of Gemini, I think of the Janus figure, or I think of, the twins, or I think of, what can I say? The constellations. All those things are part of, how I began to look at my own work. How does it relate to mythology? How does it relate to the universe? How does it relate to all those things that are in our lives? And again, looking at the bottom part of this piece, if I have something on a square, it's generally a reference to the earth, the four corners of the earth. So all these, there are lots of things in this piece. There are bullets in this piece. There's a crow in this piece. I consider the crow my spirit sculpture. And what was really funny, I just recently had a crow taxidermied because it fell on my roof and I felt like I had to preserve it. The interesting thing was the taxidermist, when I asked him about the crow, I said, is it a crow or a raven? Because I really was hoping it would be a raven. But he said, ma'am, you can't change the DNA of the crow. It's a crow, accept it. So it turns out that it was one of the opportunities for me to really think about what the crow was about, and the fact that they're incredibly intelligent. They're some of the most intelligent birds, and they are related to the raven in that respect, but their intelligence is something that they gather together as a family. When one of them dies, they gather together, and they actually mourn. They mourn their companion. And so I found that really fascinating about this particular bird. Next slide. This one, Icarus, my question has always been about Icarus, knowing that he flew too close to the sun, and his father, Daedalus, tried to tell him, don't fly so high. And if you know the myth of of Icarus, you'll understand that there's an ambition there. And yet, in that ambition, as he flies close to the sun, his wings melt because they were of wax. But my question was, even as he fell down to the sea, even as he fell, what happened to him then? Where did he go? Was that the end of Icarus? And the real title of this piece is Whatever Happened to Icarus? The last one, I think, is there one more? Yes. This one, I would like to say a very short version of what I call the long healing prayer, and then I will tell you a bit about my Nkisi. It's an excerpt from a long healing prayer. And it is, when I say it's a long healing prayer, it's like about 24 verses. So I'm only going to give you 3 of them. I call on thee, O Spirit, O light, O most manifest one, thou the sufficing, thou the healing, thou the abiding, O abiding one. I call on thee, O constant one, O life-giving one, O source of all being, thou the sufficing, thou the healing, thou the abiding, O thou abiding one. I call on thee, O manifest, yet hidden, O unseen, yet renowned, O onlooker, sought by all, thou the sufficing, thou the healing, thou the abiding, O thou abiding one. I read that because one of the things that I think about, just in the context of Nkisi, its origin is in West Africa, specifically the Congo. And it is associated with so many things within a community, within the African community. And a lot of these Nkisis, as Africans were brought to the Americas, and South America as well. When I say the Americas, that's what I mean. North America, the Caribbean. People brought with them so much of their soul, so much of their need to go back to that concept of resilience. You know, you had to find a way to commune with oneself, and you brought things with you, and that was your soul. You bought it because you knew if wherever you landed, you had to have that. And the Nkisi, as I say here, is a communal concept. And its role is to harness blessings. And it's also of a high importance because even though we may see them in museums, they really belong in communities and they belong on altars. And this particular Nkisi that I created was largely to honor a tree that was protecting my studio for over 10 years, and it grew to be 100 feet tall. And because it was so close to the studio, we had to cut it down. So I ended up thinking, how can I honor this tree? What is it about this mother tree that's really important? And my goal was to think about it as a concept of a sort of a protection. So in the exhibition, she stands 6 feet tall, and she is used in a way that is, those who come can actually attach a bead to her, because a bead is about prayer. And we think about beads in all kinds of cultures that practice prayer, you know, have prayer beads to use. My goal, again, was to give this female presence to this particular Nkisi, because again, I think that as she protected my studio, I wanted her universal soul to protect those who decide that they can actually put a bead on her. And that's really that's what the piece is about. It's very, in a very simple way, and not to take up everybody's time, but that's her. Thank you. Friends. That's it. Just some friends.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Consuelo, you ready?
Yes, I am.
Perfect, perfect.
I loved what I just went through a senior moment. But what you were saying about resistance and survival, I really feel, can we put on the first slide? There we go. I grew up like that, you know, where I knew I had to survive, and I knew that I had to resist a lot of everything, it seemed. But my main word, after I thought I am in control, I can do this, was I have to infiltrate. So with infiltration, that became my call as I entered a grown up into the real world. And in this sense, I think what I have to start is when I was 2 or 3, when I first came in contact with, they were going to tell me what the cross that I saw everywhere in my environment, you know, what was that about? And as they were explaining to me, and I'm thinking of it was my older brothers or sisters, I was number 11 of 12. They were explaining to me the story of the cross. And at the same time, I was trying to understand they're killing this guy, nailing him, and it's the most glorious point in the world. I didn't get the oxymoronic idea of death being life and life being brought on by death, a horrific death. And then I went, okay. Then they were going to teach me immediately how to say the sign of the cross. And I'm just a little kid knowing that this is really important stuff, because obviously the presentation was being very dramatic to me, and it was given to me in dramatic. And so, okay, Father, Son, Mother, sister, wait a minute, what? Holy Spirit, genderless, what happened to the mom? What happened to the sister? What's going on with this thing? Does not compute. Okay, so I took care of my spirit. Nobody's going to get my spirit, especially people who can't even recognize that there's a trilogy here. We just left out the feminine. That was my encounter with spirituality. And I realize now that it wasn't spirituality, it was religion. Because to me, religion is organized spirituality, which is an oxymoron. However, that's another lecture discussion. So here I am at 9 years old, reading now the story of, and I was trying to read everything I could, because in the fields, we had a bookmobile that came to the camps, and I would check out books, and realizing that I was going to be behind in all my studies, because we didn't go to school till October, and we had to leave school in March because of the harvest seasons. I decided to read nothing but basically no fiction. I had to read science, history, biographies, so that I could be running with my peers that were not campesinos in the school. So I came across the book of Joan of Arc and her story, and I was 9. And this is a weaving, by the way, that I made for Joan of Arc in early 1990, and I call her burial shroud. And it's maybe like 5 feet, because she wasn't that tall. And you see, I wove it in a trapezoidal, but I hung it kind of vertically to get kind of like a figure underneath. And on the left is her blue sword, and on the right is her white cross, which were her 2 main powers. They said that she dressed mostly in white. So I figured that she didn't have a proper burial. So I decided to give her or weave her a burial shroud, because she affected me so much, her story, that here's this young woman that was 14, leading an army, kicking England out of France. And here I was crying because I was picking prunes in a field somewhere in Central California, and being at the lowest of the social economic strata. So at 9, I decided I'm going to be 10 in another decade. If this lady can do all that in the 1,000 years ago, and she was only 14, I know by 20, I can pick no more forever. And I swear I will now do my life in decades, because I only have 5 or 6 decades of trips around the sun. And I know that in each decade, I will sleep for 3 to 4 years, because we have to sleep a third of our lives. So that was my second religious opening. Oh my gosh, life is short. We are just temporary on this world. So cut to the next slide. And here's more what I'm talking about. That's me standing next to my mom in the prune field in Vacaville, California, 35 cents a box. And there's my Virgen de Guadalupe, which I always questioned until I was old enough to read about who she really was. And I always questioned, what are you doing in my house? You belong over there. Aren't you the mother of that guy that they stuck onto that cross? What are you doing over here? But then I realized she isn't from over there. She never moves. You never see her coddling. You never see her coddling the baby or hugging her son for the last time, or offering him some wine or what. You never see her like that. She never moves. And she represents material, the mundane, the physical world. She has the heavens as her shawl, the earth is the dress, and the sun behind her is always, and the squalene brat is beneath her feet, holding her up. Always like that. And she appeared in a temple that was Guatlique, which was the Earth Mother of the Americas. I learned all this as I grew up because like I tell you, I wanted to know everything. So there I realized I was underneath the heavens and on top of the earth. And we were all here stuck for maybe 8 or 10 decades, going around the sun, going around the sun. So some people like Emiliano Zapata, a hero, he's stronger than most. Maybe he had a lot more spirit. The Virgen de Guadalupe, she was the maternal understanding that we can understand our material world. And as for the male, I'm not male, I didn't really care. I just need to understand myself and my position in this world as a woman that is close to the earth. Because the good thing that happened to me that I felt empowered me more than a lot of folk is that I stayed for 15 or 20, 16 years close to the earth, on my knees, putting my hands in the fruit, in the vegetables, touching the earth, feeling the beauty of the fresh wind, seeing the incredible majesty of the clouds that would entertain me and soothe me as I worked these hot fields. So to me, that was my spiritual connection to this world, not a dogmatic religion. So being free and also very different, here I go, grown up. I'm going to now go to school and be an artist. I'm not sure because I really love embroidery. I love thread. I'm a woman. My God, why am I going to paint and sculpt like a man? I'm a woman, but it's a craft. This is back in 1979, 1980, when craft was cooties, and you better believe weaving was under basket water. It was the butt of everything. But mi Consuelo was used to now, if I was the first of 11 of 12 to get into high school, let alone college, then I have a mission. This is not going to stop me. I am going to show the world that a voice of a woman can be heard in the art scene with thread. So that was my first peak, was at San Diego State into the painting art department of San Diego State back in 1981. And couldn't have the next slide. And this was my rendition of my Virgen de Guadalupe. She wasn't happy. She wasn't even well fed. In fact, she was miserable. And if you notice, it's a dark, almost apocalyptic. I was an undergrad trying to sneak in threads and nails into a plywood because really I couldn't relate to putting pigments on a canvas. That wasn't in my contextual upbringing. But plywood, wires, nails, paint, oh, I couldn't do that. So if you, next slide. If you look close up, I put little nails along the edges of the side, and then I strung red wire over my dark Virgen. I was laughed out, said that don't even bring that into the art department. Definitely ahead of his time. We're talking now 1980, where I knew it was awesome. It was edgy. It was incredible. But because the painting department rejected it, I delved myself into learning how to weave. And that's how I learned how to weave that Joan of Arc piece. I learned the loom. I learned how to spin, dye. I wanted to make art where I didn't need anybody or anything to help me. I just needed a scissors, a needle, a pot of water, and I knew I could make my own art if I knew the world of the thread. So now I learned how to weave at San Diego State. Now I'm in 1987, 84, and I'm at San Jose. Next slide. Where they were not teaching me form, but I was learning content and context. Okay, you want context because the beautiful woven Joan of Arc is too decorative. So they want something even more angstier. Well, here's my Virgen de Guadalupe that I silk screened, I spray painted onto a bamboo curtain. And then I took off the resisting tape and then destructed the bamboo curtain and rewove it into the structure of the tapestry. And you can tell this Virgen is spooky. I always thought it was spooky, but really I call it Virgen of the headlights. Why? Because I was always terrified with my 10-year plan at 9 that I was not going to make it out to high school. So yes, Columbus discovered America. Yes, this world was made for freedom for all. And yes, I will never do graffiti or anything like that in my youth, because I want to go to college and get a degree in high school. So, but my fantasy was always, you know, if I was a graffiti artist, I'd probably do a Virgen de Guadalupe, but I know that if I did it, the headlights would be right behind me, get out of, away from the wall, you know, so I didn't. So this was my first time where I did a life-size, larger than life scale Virgen portrait. And this time I did my graffiti the way I would love to have done it back in my youth as a junior high and high school. But I did it as a graduate student at San Jose State University, where, okay, let's talk context now. Because why am I doing bamboo? Because it's all over the thrift stores. People were unloading bamboo slides everywhere. And so they were a very cheap commodity, and they rolled up and unrolled, and I could take them apart easily and put them back together. So that was my context. I'm sorry, I don't go hang out with canvas places. You know, I hang out at thrift stores, folks. So then 10 years later, I'm now teaching full-time tenure at that same place. They couldn't let me go. And I'm traveling, and my daughter gave birth to my granddaughter called Xochitl, which means flower, which was what my father wanted to call me. But flower means Xochitl means flower in Nahuatl. And my mom said that's too Indian of a name, so they named me Consuelo, which I was like, darn, all my life they should have called me Xochitl. But my granddaughter was called Xochitl. And now the next slide. And now I'm traveling around the country doing lectures, and I take my embroidery with me, and I'm embroidering a beautiful baby blanket quilt for my granddaughter. And the first time ever, I'm using flowers in my work. And aren't they beautiful? It was almost finished. And then I saw this, not for my granddaughter, it's for that little girl. Can you do the next slide? That's in the caution sign. That's being dragged across the freeway where cars are going 65 to 75 miles an hour. And if you see, I quilted this piece with a caution sign throughout the whole piece. And that's who this was. That's why the Virgen de Guadalupe is a skull. She is dead. Why? Because she's mourning the death of not just the family, but the little girls. So that was the first piece that got acquired by the Smithsonian. So I've been intrigued with the Virgen de Guadalupe, always wanting to represent her somehow besides the traditional iconic form. I never knew how until I came up with a series of rebozos, which means shawl, for our mothers. I did 5 of them for the earth, moon, the mundane, and the Virgen de Guadalupe, which was the most difficult and the last one to do. And then can you do the next one? And this is the rebozo that I wove for the Virgen de Guadalupe. I decided no pictures, no imagery, just like the light, just like that guy over there, Moses, when he saw God, it was a burning bush. And so I thought, well, the Virgen, I probably wouldn't be, I'm too mortal to see her. The best I can do is see the shine. So I got gold threads from the Japanese, the people that would embroider gold threads on the emperor's robe. I got access to some of those threads, so I used them to weave this. And have a close-up. The next slide, please. With silver threads that I had procured over the internet. So this is a woven piece that I did that represents the Virgen de Guadalupe. If I had to do a shawl for her, it would be of gold and silver threads. And it's because I I feel like the little drummer boy. I can't do anything more but sing my song, beat my drum, in my case, weave my threads. So this is a gift to the Virgen to to acknowledge that I want her to know, I think of you. I know you're everywhere. You love my dad. My dad loved you. And I know you're not the mother of Jesus. You're the mother of Jesus and everybody. You are the mother. Next slide. So my work has always been to unify, and instead of the word modernity, and we're now in this age of modernism, and oh, the world is falling apart. And I was like, wait a minute. The first time they used the word modernity was in 50 AD in Rome, where some philosopher said, hey, we're now in the modern age. There's no more Caesar and there's no more pagan. There's only Christianity. And that was the new modern age. And so we've been going through modern ages for, I don't know how long now, but I do know that way back in the Babylonian Hammurabi writings, they were already bemoaning this new world, how the young people aren't listening to the elders, and the priests are all corrupt, and then the government is falling apart, and it's going to be over soon. That was back in Mesopotamia. We're still here doing the same thing. And I figured, well, the world might always be like this. And we have 70 or 80 trips around the sun to come to terms with this. What are we going to do about it? Are we going to do anything about it? Or are we just going to move around? All I know that in the Americas, England and Spain duked it out for the land here. And so that's why I'm always trying to, it's not, our role is to take care of each other, but I'm still with Rodney King. Can we just get along? Can't we just get along? Why do we have to have this Spain and England keep duking it out here? Why is this necessary? And so that's what this flag is about. I got a Mexican flag. I went with a sewing machine back and forth to make it the US flag. And then Guadalupe, remember the Mother Earth deity from that I said that where the Virgen de Guadalupe appeared? Well, this is kind of a cartoon rendering of what she looks like, a 20-foot statue in the Mexican Anthropology Museum in DC. You can, DFA, I mean, you'll be able to see her. So literally this lady is almost like by gender. And you see where those serpents, she wears a skirt of serpents. And I'm going, that must really be fascinating when she rock and rolls. Can you imagine how those serpents must be flying around as she's dancing? Oh, and then her claws. She has feet like I do, and I really could relate to this lady. And I'm going, this is Guadalupe. And of course they came up with the Virgen de Guadalupe because nobody except for the Americas could accept a deity looking like this. So with that, let's go to the next slide. And here's isn't that beautiful? It's distressed. I did the sewing machine, then I tore off the white after I sewn on the white stripes to give it a distressed look. And I went over and over with sewing machine colors to show that nail, hey, darling, we have to do our nails. Come on. Next slide. So here I am, still with it. Why are you still doing that, Consuelo? Because we still can't get along. We still are not getting along. So what's going to happen? I don't know, but I know I love this deity, and you can see I'm working on her sketch over there I put that paper on top of the flag, and I merged her together, and this is my ongoing project right now, along with other ones. I usually do weaving and sewing, always thread, always. And it was very interesting because as a graduate student at San Diego, and as a graduate student where I got my MA, and as a graduate student at San Jose, I was the only person to be in fibers. Everybody that was close to fibers were installation, mixed media, or performance. But in the hallways, they go, Consuelo, I used to weave. And I would call them my closet thread artists. So I was empowered because I knew once I graduated, I would be the only one working on this, but I got snookered in by the full-time tenure track that they offered me. So I never left academia. And I swore I'm going to leave academia in 10 years with a full-time professor tenure and everything. And I did, but they didn't let me go. But I did achieve that full-time tenure. But I left 10 years later when I realized that time, like what Liqua knows, is forever. These nations go on and we'll never know 1,000, 2,000 years from now who McConnell was, who number 45 was. Nobody, I mean, really. Let's go to the next slide. So here it is, still in process. It's not completed, but I have to go in and emphasize her big eyes on the top. And I named it Coatlicue because that's the name of the deity. Where's Califas, which is how we homies call California. I only painted the Texas bluebonnet, the saguaro, and Arizona yucca, and the New Mexico yucca on the flag. I purposely left out the California. So this is how I see spirit and the mundane and nation exploding. Who's going to win? Well, obviously, Coatlicue. You can see her claws are already at the bottom, the serpent's skin at the middle range. I mean, the serpent's heads as her skirt. And I always tell people, good art will bring you to the cliff. A great art will make you jump. Can you believe that we can get along? Can we believe that the earth will dominate no matter what? It's only 80 years or 90 years around the sun we have. We sleep for 1/3. Can't we get along for the other? And this is the structure and the basis as to why I make this kind of stuff instead of try to make a beautiful shawl or a blanket for my husband and a shawl for my new grandson or I can't do that until I feel restless. I want to go when it's time to embrace the ecstatic, as they say in Christianity, in your death. I want to go that I had a really good time trying to get folk to get along. And I think that's the purpose of my work. That's the purpose of all these anonymous women stitchers that had incredible thread work throughout history all over the world. And I know that their dreams and aspirations were the same as us. Survival, resistance, getting along. Can we take care of each other? Can we take care of the earth, the planet? There's so much more to my work, but I only had 10 minutes and I think I went over. So thank you. Oh yeah, look at that. Explosions. It's going to be incredible. Look, and and by the way, the blue tape oilcloth, it wasn't intended to be in the piece, but it looked so good. I got the permission from my daughter that I could cut it up and use it. So I did. Isn't that wonderful? Even though it's chaotic, that's our mandate. That's our walk, I think. Anyway, like I said, I could go on forever. Sorry, Melanie.
No, it's fantastic and quite beautiful. And the time that we have is never enough to be able to really get into. But I am, so excited about this conversation and the process of curating this conversation and coming across the work of these artists and why the word ecstatic has to deal with the feeling or expression of overwhelming happiness, joy, of an excitement. And it made me think of who are women that are working where their journey overflows into their work, the spirit of their path, it's overflowing. So these are journey women who have are not pouring from an empty cup at all, that they have taken the time to feed into their vessels to the point that it overflows in a way that they're using material to create language for the unseen and the unspoken. So I'm so excited to be able to have you all talk today about this work. And also I want to invite anyone to be able to look at the show that Oletha has up if you are in the Maryland area at UMBC in the Fine Arts Building. Lowry Sims has curated a beautiful show, and Lowry Sims, thank you so much for joining us. And it's so if you have a chance to be able to go and see that, we'll be able to put the link in the chat, and it'll also be in the email that we are sending out. I wanted to ask you all I love the references to working with the earth and using the earth, and the way that you all are doing it is, from the outside looking in, is almost it's a form of a feminine resurrection. So whether it's putting your hands into the clay, whether it's the use of responding to the clay in literature with Zora Neale Hurston's "Their Clay Ain't Dry," I love that. And whether it's using the clay figure or using your experience from working with dirt to pull from it into your work. I would love to, is there anything from where you're working that draws you to the earth and draws you to pull from it, whether it's the stories or the actual material?
Are you
A lot, I think. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just curious. Are you asking Elana or just?
Oh, I see it. I see it in everyone's work, because you use the clay figures. Consuelo talks about working the earth and how being in the earth also pulled her to these stories, and Elana as responding to literature, and then how that pulling from the earth, it just seems like a divine feminine way to use material for resurrection. That's what I see. But I would just want to hear what is the pulling from the earth for you all, and how that shows up in your work.
I think, first of all, it's an interesting idea. I know for me, if I'm thinking about pulling from the earth, I love the idea of things reflecting back. And when Elana was talking about her work with the sequins and the mirrors and all those things, you know, it again, it's a reflection of us, the soul, you know, energy. But the tree, the Nkisi piece for me was very much about the earth. The fact that it grew so tall, and there was no way I could save it other than to carve into it. And my husband was instrumental in many ways, because he had, you know, chainsaws. And so if I had to think about, you know, using that tool, it's a very rough kind of tool to engage with. But I wanted that roughness too. And he ended up giving me a baby chainsaw. So everything I did, you know, with the baby chainsaw, you know, is possibly the carving on the inside and things like that. But I do believe that we are incredibly, we all know this, I think, as artists, that we're incredibly related to every aspect, you know, in terms of our DNA to the earth. And it doesn't stop there. We're just, you know, there's no way that we can separate ourselves from that. And so I often think that I go back to looking at, again, origins. What are our origins?
I'd like to say something about the earth. And I don't know if I know about the question about origins, but I do know that I love working with cotton, linen, or silk, natural fibers, and I use metallic and synthetic threads to represent modernism and or something that is man-made or man-produced or human-produced. But when I work with the silk, linen, and the cotton, I feel like I'm working with the earth's hair, its fibers. And so it's always in the work. The earth is always, and I don't see the earth separate from the moon and the stars in the sky. When I see the earth, I just see everything we can define that we know that is earth. I mean, that's the reality. That's the mundane. You know, that's the thing that we can point and define and label. But our job as humans is to bring to the earth the spirit that we have inside of us, and maybe engage with the earth, with the mundane, with spirit in mind, with spirit that guides, all those, we all know these rules, and so I think my job is to bring to the viewer this moment of, who am I? Oh my gosh, I never saw this before. Did I say a good artwork is one that brings you to the cliff? A great one makes you jump. I want to make great artwork where people jump and say, oh my gosh, that I didn't never saw this. That clarity moment, that's when spirit sparks up. And that's what the magic of arte. And that's how we can make it. And arte doesn't have to just be, it can be, with poetry. Ilana knows that. It can be with words, it can be with cooking, it can be with singing, it can bring you to another space. And I think that's our, I remember one of the philosophers, Natsawakoyo, from pre-Toltec times, Aztec times, our role is to just make flowers and songs. And I thought, yes, not resumes, not to have the second house, it's to make flowers and songs. So what does that mean? We get along with the flowers, we get along with the stars. Just because we put them in the canton doesn't mean we're celestial. I'd prefer flowers in the canton, so we can just focus here on this world. Can we do that? Can we even live to that? And that's why I use flags so much, because they put very much symbolism into that flag. Oh yeah, well then let's play symbolism. What does being stars in the canton mean? What does that really mean? Why not stars? Why not flowers? I made a piece with guns in the canton. That sounds more real to me.
I'm thinking about, so you guys gave me a lot of time to really think about how to say this, so thank you. And you had so many threads that I could see with your statements and my work. And also my work does reference the earth a lot, right? And it references this, and I never really thought of it as feminine, but even as you think about herbs and healing practices and that type of energy, it tends to take on a feminine aspect. And so when I think about pulling from the earth in general, I think about the fact that I use a lot of wood panels. And I work into my wood panels primarily with my practice. Everything is on wood. Even in the piece behind me as my backdrop, I'm carving into wood and I'm adding energy to it. In my newer pieces, I am using aspects from Nkisi sculpture, which is pretty cool. A thread, right? So I'm using aspects of Nkisi sculptures because I'm thinking about nails. And what's really interesting about that is how the nails have followed us across, right? So the nails is not only something from the Congo with Nkisi figures, but also from what I understand in the Hoodoo tradition, nails activate mojo bags and it activates different things. And so in my practice, I'm using this metal, this earth material, to then activate my work. So the wood is activating it, the herbs are activating it, nature. It's everything I've been making so far is pulling from the earth. And I think that comes from really my history in maybe history, in African-American history in general, in regards of working the land and living off of the land, right? So that's my 2 cents on that question.
I think that's really lovely. I think some of it comes across, we could define it as feminine, perhaps because the denial of the feminine requires the presence and the reclamation through feminine, and so I see that what's happening now is almost like this reclamatory act of that. So much of this has been denied, whether it's working with the fiber or working with materials that are beyond what has been considered as quote unquote fine art. But when the art that has actually held us is the art that comes from the earth using those materials. I love that there's also this use of the reflective materials and everyone's work. And it seems from the perspective of a viewer, it seems like this invitation to reflect the world, an invitation to shine, and sometimes be blinding, blind you from the sight that you may already see and offer another invitation to see something else. But also, it also offers an opportunity, a pull. Consuelo, you were talking about the jump, right? Art that makes you jump into the unknown or to a new known, right, of yourself. And so the reflective materials, I just wanted to hear you all speak a bit more about how that the use of materials that reflect, what does it do for you in the creation, and what's the connection or story to the viewer?
So I immediately think about in my older like 2014, 16 work, I was really talking about spaces, operating Black space and white space. Literally, how does my God self show up in these different spaces as I was navigating society and understanding race in America? And so the gold in my work and the gold glitter is really residue of finding my power as like finding my own personal currency. And I was even kind of having a conversation of people as currency when I was thinking about enslavement, which is really interesting. And so it was a lot of things that were happening with like a metallic material. There were so many conversations happening. And so when I decided to divorce myself from Black spaces and white spaces and just, well, not Black spaces, but divorce myself from being centered in these different spaces, I came across this gold space. And so the gold space was just like this space of abundance, of peace and happiness. And so the gold carried on throughout my work from that point. And so when I started investigating other spiritual systems, the gold continued, whether it was like in my hair or whether it was like hints of it in the background, but the metallic changed when I began to understand myself as, understand my own spiritual journey and the energies that walk with me. So it went from gold to silver. And so the shininess is really a nod. It is like modernity, as it was said, as Consuelo said, but it's also like just a nod to like power and influence, right? Like there's something shiny. I was told this at my last artist talk that humans are attracted to shininess and metals because it's a reminder of nourishment. And I was like, wow, really? That's really cool, right? A reminder of like water shines and glitters. And so we're reminded of that. And it's like, we're attracted to it because of it shining and glittering. It has the capacity to maybe nourish us, whether mentally or physically. And so, yeah, that's my attraction to metallic things. I'm thinking about it even literature-wise. We talked about the rhinestones glittering like diamonds. Like, so the shiny things have a wealth to them that I wanted to bring into my practice.
I don't think I could say that any better. Because, it is something about, it's a reflection that is about awe. I mean, there's an element of awe to it, right? And I can remember as a graduate student having, people walk into my studio, and here I was painting these huge paintings that were often very flat to me. I found myself wanting to move beyond the flatness. And so the addition of materials became really important because they have, specific qualities, and they speak to different people, and they speak in a way that allows one to, to contemplate, to really think about what your relationship is to that shiny element. And children absolutely love shiny.
They do.
All right, I have a whole spiel on that because I was assaulted by my instructor down at San Diego State. I refused to work with wool. We're in the desert, we're in Southern California. Why in the heck am I going to use wool? That's over there for the Navajos up there in the high country, or, but not here. So I won, and I got to use cotton and linen instead of wool. What was the assignment? Second point, why are you using this glittery stuff? Oh, it looks cool. Now that wasn't good enough for an art critique. And I went, well, if you really want to know, when I was a kid, I realized every drop had a rainbow,
Mhm.
every drop. And that goes to what Ilana was talking about. However, I do know that when you're tired and you look at the landscape, it shines. There's no water at that landscape.
Mhm.
Totally reflective. It's an illusion.
Mhm.
So this reflective quality has dual nature.
Yes.
Okay, so I always, and I do know that inherent nature of a material dominates why it's in my piece. Gold and silver is always in my piece because I knew that border was about a fight between oro and plata. Oro is how we referred to the US currency. Plata was how we referred to the Mexican currency. Gold and silver. Gold for the US, silver for Mexico. So the fight was about silver and gold. So everywhere that I use border or those kind of issues, I use silver and gold. Not to mention that the gold, of course, financed the revolution over here, the Renaissance in Europe, the gold from Mexico. So knowing all that history and inherent history, I love using gold and silver, not because I want it, but because I know people want it. To the Americans, the Mesoamericans here, gold was another beautiful metal, but it wasn't something to kill for. You know, it wasn't something to colonize for. However, but that's okay. Now let's get back to reflective. Why did I use reflective in my artwork? Because I knew it has a deceiving and a very reflective quality. You know, I love the reflective. What's reflecting? Light. Light brings us, like we said, we all agree, it lightens up. It's something like spirit almost.
Mhm.
So I love bringing spirit into my work. And the easiest way is to bring something reflective, something we cannot point to and say, it's that color. It's all colors. That's why we use reflective and metallic. And that's why I think as humans, we love it because it's everything at once. That's the reflective, that's the shine. And that's one of the things you got to jump off the cliff and embrace. Otherwise, you may go into a dark next journey.
Consuelo, that's funny. I think
I
that
know it is.
that dark next
Hey,
journey.
you got something we both know, you just don't talk too much about it.
Yeah,
Okay?
and it's really quite wonderful in a way too, because I think the whole idea when the Nkisi is there's a mirror inside of that belly, right? And that mirror is to reflect back to us ourselves, but yet
Mhm.
it's also related to another world, that dark world that you're talking about.
Or light.
Other
I
side.
want light. Okay. I'm not putting the dark. I already flatlined. I know what's going to happen afterwards.
Yeah, but it's really what the fascinating thing for me too is this notion of and I love that you mentioned that modernity happened centuries
50
ago. I
AD
know
was the
that.
first time written down.
I know, and I think it's really important to understand that because we consider that particular word as a important marker in our time, and it's preceded by so much history. And I think that the interesting thing about the times in which we live is how we've taken this material world and generated all this stuff, right? But we don't, and this is again an opinion, we don't really know how to connect it to one another. I mean, really, I find that really disturbing because it is not that the world's going to end because in 70 years we're gone. It's going to continue. That's my hope.
Yes.
All right. That's the hopeful part because I know it's going to continue because we're going to continue to fight. We're going to continue to do a whole bunch of stuff, that's against that strain. And when I bring up the idea of the monkeys, right, the chimpanzees and the apes, they don't have this ability to create. That's our ability as human beings. And we can do what we want with that, or we could destroy with that. We know that. So I think about it in the context of the scientific evolution of the human being. Where are we going? And how do we get there?
I think we're going to the caves again. And we're going to be there for a couple of 100 years and we'll emerge again. And they go,
Not.
it's very
It
bright.
might be okay. And it might be okay.
It has to be. I'm not going to fight it. I'm not going to, it's going to be okay no matter what.
No
Okay.
matter what.
It's what did that song say? The future is so bright, you got to wear shades. Okay.
Global warming.
Well, whatever. It was in the MTV video, it was the bomb exploding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. We just wear the shades. It's okay. It's all right. Come on, team. Fight, fight, fight.
Fight.
Yes.
And I think that's that conversation of the end in the beginning again is just quite fascinating again, because once again, what you're saying that this conversation, this idea of modern gives this notion that there's a new conversation, but how many times have the conversation of the end and how many times of the conversation, like how many times can we do this? And how it's fascinating to see you like artists to see how we can use material to mark time, but also to remind us that sometimes you can seem like you're going in a straight line, but you're just moving in a circle really slowly.
Right.
So you're actually just
around the sun over.
You're really going around in this, you're doing the same cycle. So it's I find that fascinating. I mean, we think we're going, but we're actually maybe going the same direction, which might require caves again. We never,
It might
never
require
know.
that. And you know what? The circle is one, it closes, but the spiral continues.
There you
to go up.
Yeah.
And it's a 3 spiral, the Earth, and then the Earth around the sun, and then the whole galaxy is spinning. So there's
and then
like,
the unknown.
hang on, because it's moving and it's moving quite fast. We just, when we feel it in the equinox and the solstice, then your days, you need 1 or 2 days to adjust the magnetic waves to your body. Because I know during that time, I'm like, I don't know how to stand.
It's true.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's fun. I know for me, it's only going to be a couple of more decades, but it's still fun.
Yeah, it's fun.
It is. And let's bring it on, Come on, let's have fun. Look at my stuff. Look at your stuff. Look at Elena's stuff. I mean, come on, it's wonderful. It's exciting. It's creative. What do you want to do? How do you want to do it? What do you think? Sing a song, write a book, dance, come on, let's celebrate every day that we're all moving in the same place. And
that is another connective thread that I see in you all's work. It's definitely this continuous invitation for the viewer to respond and to act. And like, it's almost like, the work is saying to you, so what are you making? Do you have anything to say? Because I'd like to hear from you. Like the work speaks and calls you to make, right? One, because there's this use of materials that we're familiar with, right? So there's this, Alana's working with a lot of the tiles and the glass, and Oletha as well as, and Consuelo's working with the threads and the materials. And so when you see your everyday in fine art, there is an invitation to re-see the everyday as fine art and to make it. And so I just love the invitation y'all have. I hope people are inspired.
Jump.
I say dance.
Yes,
jump.
dance.
Why go off jumping? What's the problem? Any way you want, just do it. It's so fun because I remember there was so much resistance to the thread and I didn't understand that. As artists, why are you resisting my threads? And I knew the real artist said, that's pretty cool, Consuelo.
Yeah.
And those were the
resistance to
really
thread is
good
liberatory. Like,
Pardon?
I think the resistance is there because it's a clear understanding that thread and material from the earth are liberatory materials. It's something that everyone has access to. And what happens when everyone has access to creation?
Right.
And being a creator? I don't know if that's really in a society that wants suppression and oppression really wants everyone to have access to
Exactly.
creation.
It's totally
I-
gatekeeping.
That's it. And the gatekeeping is the problem, because, you know, it's something that you go through, you know, through this particular, the way the art world works. It's like, it's so what I call gated in many ways. And you just have to move past that. It's so important to move past that. Because
Infiltrate.
it's not about selling. It's not about, you know, art stuff being on a wall. It really is that, because I mean, in terms of teaching, I always felt it was important to tell my students, if you draw a stick figure, it is fine. You're saying to me that that's a human, or that's a female, and that's your way of expressing that idea. We teach children out of that, you know, because we assume that it look a certain way or be a certain kind of thing, or art theory, you know, all that stuff to me is one way of getting kids to shut down in an educational system. So I always feel that we are responsible in many ways for how we educate.
I mean, I think it's fantastic when Elana was talking about teaching to make the gree bag. I mean, the excitement I have over here, I'm ready to do that with my daughter. So like
No.
the idea of these ancestral traditions being taught as fine art, how did your students like respond to that? What was the engagement that they had around that?
In short, I would say they were into it. Like it was just a book. It was Mama Kuya's idea. And they were just kind of really into the idea of making them, and they put stuff in them. And it was a really interesting process for us. And I'm even thinking about what Oletha said about just like not hindering people's creativity. Like when I'm teaching, I like tell my students are like, is this okay? And I'm like, do you think it's okay? I'm like, if you think it's okay, it's cool. And then, you know, I like tell them, I was like, but if you want to like make it look better, you could do this, you could do that. But if you're just cool, I'm cool, and we can be cool with it. Right. And this is like a little bit of a tangent, but I'm even thinking about like our conversation with modernity, and like just the beginning and end, and how we're always, I feel like our works are always at the intersections of like the past, present, and future. Like it's all existing at one time. And I'm even thinking about how like with the tiles that I'm using, that's also a Byzantine art conversation. Like the gold is also a Byzantine art conversation with the mosaics and the shiny, right? So it's really fascinating, really, to think about how all of us have taken these materials that might be considered like lower class in regards to like glass or rhinestones or thread or folk art, and we've like elevated it and demanded its elevation, right? It wasn't just kind of like, oh, I say it is, so it is. It was like, no, it actually is. You know, it's bigger than what you assumed it could be and should be. And I'm just seeing that trend move throughout like the artists and the art world's understanding of art now, and how like preserving history and community is becoming really important. At least in the past, 5 years, people have been really interested in this type of art.
I do feel like the time in the pandemic was a warp speed for that as well.
I was gonna say, I hope it's longer than that, because I've been working for a long time too. And I know
Yes.
No. And I always challenge the students, because I know that art exists in every one of us.
yeah.
And I know with time, and if you're in the right space and you have the right materials and the right classes, anybody can shadow an egg.
Yeah.
So does that mean you're an artist? Well, I would challenge a student, yes and no. Do you want to be a professional artist? The challenge there is, how do you put that shadowed egg image into history?
Right.
That's the challenge. No longer is shadowing an egg necessary. It's getting into crossing the borders into that gated art world. And how do you do that? That is the challenge. Everybody does it differently.
Yeah.
Every artist made their own path, and realizing that at 20 or 30, I went, oh my God, okay, I saw the folk crafts of Mexico. Those are some of the most awesomest pieces of art I've ever seen in my life. I don't care. And besides, the best artist was Van Gogh because he hung out with weavers. So I'm not going to paint no more. I'm going to pick up the needle and thread, and I will not look back. I don't care what they call me, whether it's craft, weaver, or whatever, but I'm going to use that thread because I know that I will be a footnote somewhere saying the crazy lady from the borderlands was saying this stuff with threads. So you have to define your fate, where you want to place yourself in history, and go for it. And the easiest ways, I would tell my students, is get those little pieces of paper, you know, like the BA and the MA and the mighty fine artist. That's what we need, because you're a woman, you're an other, and you're poor. Realize that, embrace it, and let that empower you, and find out, what is your bliss? Is it the clay? Is it the thread? Is it the song? Is it the dance? Whatever it is, you remember, anybody can do those, but how do you put it into the history if that's what you want to do? And I always say, some of the best artists and best creative people we're never going to hear about, because they don't want to play this art game.
I think that's a great question, right? Like, because like I feel like you have to play the art game, Consuelo, like in regards to ending up in the history books. Like there's very clear threads and like pathways that you're like, okay, that might get me into a history book. This might get me into a history book. But when we were thinking about having like the gatekeeping conversation, it's really like institutions and people, or it feels like it's always someone you need to impress that decides, okay, yeah, this is good, versus like you just feeling it's good. Like there are other people who have to also believe that about your work too.
And that's the challenge. That's the challenge. What are you going to do? Knowing all that. So you figure it out. Remember, it's not checkers, it's chess. There's all kinds of moving parts out there that we can manipulate and navigate. Chess is very linear and you know, and straightforward. Anybody can read your moves, but in a chess game, figure it out. It's so complex, life is, that only you know where you get up in the morning. What do you have to tell your friends when we go party? I tell them, I got to go mop my kitchen first. You want to come? And then we go party. And that would give me time to do my work. We have to figure out, what are the temptations that we're given now? You know, what are the ones that are saying, no, 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 you don't want to do that. You know, you're never going to make it. You know, I remember getting into the arts was like, the statistics were like, you know, 99.9% of the artists that had an MA or an MFA, within 3 or 5 years, they were now managers of Starbucks or, you know, consultants, but they weren't artists like they were talking about in graduate school. So
I would also,
and then you also realize that at the point there were only like 300 galleries or museums in the whole US, and there were like 10,000 MAs coming out, MFAs coming out every year.
Right.
So the competition is high. So how are you going to do it? Well, you got 80, 90 years around the sun. Figure it out if you want to do it.
I would just want to add to the conversation is just that there are already enough gatekeepers. Don't create one in your own head. So,
yes,
you know, don't create this idea of more gatekeepers than necessary. The other thing is create your own space that are on I think Mother Toni Morrison speaks to that, working from the fringe and centering it. And then I also believe that artists should do at least 2 to 5 years in arts administration, because that offers a shift. I've done 3 to 5 years in that space. And I think that having artists in that space shifts how it's done. And also the world that is created already does not limit the world that you are creating. And I think that's an important part as an artist, like this idea that your life only comes from this small, limited world that has all these kind of cues and things. You are a creator that creates the world that your world needs. And we do that through technology. I mean, social media has changed, how we use space has changed. I mean, you know, so many things are changing about what we're creating. You know, I can't believe it. I knew that this conversation, we're already like almost 30 minutes over in our conversation.
Oh, no.
And so I really just I applaud everyone that has stayed with us. And this conversation is as rich in this virtual reality as it was in my imagination, as far as like why I was like, these are people that need to talk. So I just want to thank you all, Oletha, Consuelo, and Elana, for your generosity of your spirit, of your time, the generosity that you put into your work, and how you are demanding new ways of being and new ways of speaking. And I just want to say your work is working outside of your studio, and it's working together. I hope that you all find ways to stay connected and to continue to follow each other's paths. And anyone that wants to, when we send the follow-up letter, we'll make sure that there's, you know, information about how to find them, how to be connected. Once again, I just want to give another plug for Oletha's show over at UMBC that is curated by one of my favorite, in my mind, mentors. She doesn't even know she's in my imagination. Is how I live my life. Laurie Sims. She's all of the above. So she has this show curated, and it's a beautiful continuation of this conversation. So please go and check their work out, check out Elana, check out Consuelo, and continue to check us out. The next thing that we have coming up is the book club. We are looking at the book Finding La Negrita. It is a beautiful book that is looking at the Divine Mother. Consuelo, I'll make sure you have information because I think there's some, you might want to be there. So stay tuned for information about Costa Rica's history with the Divine Mother and the stories that are told there. Yes. Oh, is this your book?
Yes.
Yeah. And
so, it's an
and
anthology. Academic, like 20 essays, academic essays by Duke Publishing. And it's about the work, just pure work. And now we have something to claim. Yes, I can do it because Consuelo did it, and it's got accepted by everyone. So yes, please plug it.
I love it. Yeah. So I'll get the link from you so we can share that. But thank you all for coming. And this is it. You all have definitely brought some amazingness to this space. Thank you all for making this reality dream. Yes, you're welcome.
And you're so beautiful. And I really enjoyed meeting other fellow art warriors. So there we go.
Yes. The work continues. And once again, as Oletha said, we're not going in circles. We're spiraling up, baby. So let's keep doing it.
Adios.
Have a good evening. Bye.
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 Bye.